God is good, and with each day that passes brings us a day closer to the launch of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. This is the Nathan Napalm channel, and if you are new here, please consider subscribing, especially if you're interested in Pantheon related content on our march to launch. Now, I've made over 200 videos about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, my excitement for it, various different things about the game, how it works, different systems, but I wanted to take a step back because things are getting a little crazy, right? I'm getting pretty deep into it. I'm assuming that you know a lot of things that maybe some of you are newer to Pantheon, and I wanted to make a video that basically would be great for somebody who doesn't know what the majority of the Pantheon fans follows their every move and step. So this video is going to tell you what is Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Why are people so excited for it? Why is it being called the savior of the MMO genre, etc.? So first of all, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen was a crowdfunded game that is, I'd say, mid-development by now, and it was founded and started by the late, great Brad McQuaid. Now, Brad McQuaid is the key designer behind EverQuest, the original EverQuest, a very successful MMO. Arguably the first real 3D MMORPG that introduced tons and tons of things and content that still prevail today. Also, he went on to make Vanguard Saga of Heroes, etc. Now, Brad McQuaid was and always will be a very beloved by the entire industry of video games for what he did for online gaming. So that is what really started the hype when Pantheon Rise of the Fallen was initially announced, was because Brad McQuaid was behind the helm. Now, he gathered a hand-selected all-star cast of people to work on his project, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, which was actually from the ground up designed to bring social gameplay and the old feelings and memories and adventures that seem to just be missing in the MMO genre today. That was the entire premise behind Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and he began building tenets of his vision. We're going to cover that first. Let's talk about these because these are the things that are like law. This is the law behind Visionary Realms, the developers of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and when they go to work, when they're developing and the entire process, these have been the laws they have stuck to make sure that this vision of social MMORPG gameplay stays intact. Number one is that an awareness that content is king. In other words, without content, you don't have an MMORPG. You need to fill the game with plenty to do, more than what a person could possibly achieve. Also, number two, a requirement that classes have identities. No single player should be able to do everything on their own, because that tenet is what is going to allow people to work together and socialize, and it pushes them in that direction. It's a game built where you can't do everything on your own. Can you solo in this game? Sure. It's going to be slower, and you're going to run into a lot of obstacles where you could have used another person. You're going to die more often. It's going to be a lot more difficult. But that's because you picked a class, and that class has an identity, and it has something it's really good at, but it has lots of other things it's not good at and needs other people to help fill that role. Number three, a belief that game economies should be predicated on delaying and minimizing item value deflation. This is in order to make sure that the economy, which was always huge to Brad McQuaid, it's one of his favorite things about MMOs is the actual economies within them, and this is put in place basically to make sure that items in the game don't become inflated to a point of ridiculousness, because that makes it very hard for a new player. And actually, when sometimes they see that and they're like, I can't even play this game, it's impossible, I came too late. It happens. It's something unavoidable, but it should be delayed and it should be minimized. And there's lots of steps they're taking in order to make sure that stays in place, including coin weight, but lots of others as well. The next one is a commitment to a style of play that focuses on immersive combat and engaging group mechanics. Now, a lot of people would take these words and think, oh, it's an action combat game. It's not. It's a tab-targeted game, but it's very immersive in that the way you react, the way you set up your hotbar, what you decide to put on that hotbar, because you can't put them all on there in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. You have to go into a battle with a little bit of thought and process as far as what you're going to be doing, what would be the best for this particular group, who's in the group, what value of your abilities would you bring to the group by putting that in there, and also what are you doing on this particular event that you're going to take. And engaging group mechanics, the abilities in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, I have lots of videos on each individual class if you want to check that out. You'll see as you begin to work your way through these that they work with each other. Some are good for this, and some are good for that. Some complement others. It's a system that engages the group with the abilities itself, but also not just the abilities, but the actual way that the mobs behave, such as the disposition system. We'll get to more of that in a minute. Next is an understanding that a truly challenging game is truly rewarding. Yes, Pantheon is a very challenging game. It's a game that you will die, that there will be consequences for dying, that you'll actually get terrified in certain situations and freak out. You're going to be scrambling around for your abilities and because you pulled a couple of extra mobs by accident. But when you make it through these, there needs to be rewards for that. There needs to be a risk versus reward, and that is very prevalent in everything that Pantheon is. The next one is an expectation that with great risk will come greater reward. So that's what we were just talking about. If it's a challenging game, then you need that reward, but there needs to be a risk. You don't just get the reward because you're logging in again. You don't just get the reward because you spent the time. You have to go for the risk. You have to go and fight harder things. You have to go for that boss. You have to go to that dangerous place. You have to group up with other people, and that takes a little bit of courage these days as well. Socializing with other people so that you can build those groups and build those social bonds and get out there and do the harder content for the greater reward. Next up is an understanding that player involvement is required for progression. All actions, or lack thereof, should have consequences. Positive actions should be rewarded. Apathy, or lack of action, should not be rewarded with bonuses. So you're not playing the game, you don't get anything. You get rewarded for being in the game, for doing things in the game. All this goes right back to risk versus reward. Next up is a belief that meaningful character progression will always involve a player increasing in both power and prestige. It's important that in an MMO, and it's crazy that this even has to be mentioned, but when characters progress, they get more powerful. They get better things. That's what people will get addicted to. That's the fun part of an MMORPG. You have to have that, or, the game's gonna suck, honestly. Next up is a mindset that some degree of downtime should be part of a game, ensuring players have time to form important social bonds. So most games are created with no downtime. Go, 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 fast as you can, race to the finish, and nobody hardly even talks. There might be a hello, there might be a good group at the end, nobody's talking. Everybody just, for one thing, the content's not hard enough for you to need to socialize about what you're doing, but also, there's just not that time. Now, Pantheon is not making it like the old original EverQuest where there's tons of downtime, but there is going to be some, and they're balancing that, so that there's a little bit of downtime for you to talk, for you to get to know the other people in your group, socialize, and create memories. And it is necessary. When MMOs moved away from downtime altogether, absolutely, at that point, socialization went down the toilet with it. We didn't realize that at the time, most of us, but that's what happened. Next up is a belief that an immersive world requires intelligent inhabitants. Okay, Pantheon's addressing this with their NPCs, with the mobs, etc., having disposition. I said I would get back to that. Well, here it is. The disposition system is one of many ways that the inhabitants actually seem intelligent, and that is because when they spawn, they can be given any various different types of dispositions, and there's a lot of them. They could be an alarmist, where they're the type to want to go run and get other people. They could be the type, for example, that are intelligent enough to go straight for your healer, and go straight for the healer, which is scary as crap to think about, but they have different dispositions, and that same mob can respawn with a totally different disposition and behave totally different, meaning it takes different strategies in order to take it down. So as you're out in these public dungeons, out with other people in the same dungeon perhaps that you did the night before and the night before and the night before, your experience, although you've learned the dungeon now maybe, and you know this area really well, what happens to you in that dungeon can now be very different than what happened to you before. The next one is an understanding that faction and alignment should be an integral part of interacting with the world and its citizens. So having factions, something to work for, something to strive for, something to get alignment with and to progress in order to interact with different societies within the world, those are very immersive. Those are very awesome key parts of what made EverQuest so fun, was all of the factions and all the ways that you could get in good with it, you know, change a particular city from being kill on sight as soon as you come near the guards to actually being able to enter that city now because you built up a reputation for that particular place through that faction. Stuff like that is huge, and I love it, and it is definitely a big part of Pantheon. A sincere commitment to creating a world where a focus on cooperative play will attract those seeking a challenge. So making sure that the game is built around playing with others, that you need a group, that you need other people, and that by creating the game that way, other people will come to look for that challenge because it'll be addicting, it will be fun, they'll be meeting new people or hanging out with their friends, and they're all having a shared experience of playing the game. A belief that the greatest sense of accomplishment comes when it is shared and earned. And I would add to that, the greatest memories are from that as well. And in MMORPGs is when it's with other people and it was hard, it was difficult, and you figured it out and you got past a difficult situation together. That is huge. That's impactful. An agreement that player levels should be both meaningful and memorable. So leveling up should be powerful. It should just be something that happens and nobody even says grats anymore because big deal, you're probably gonna level up 20 times tonight, that kind of thing. So a little bit longer of a leveling period. So that people are actually, it's meaningful. It's a big deal when you level up. And the last one is an assertion that player versus environment should involve more than NPCs. Engage the world. So with this one in particular, lots of actual things in the game about this, but the one that comes to mind, obviously at the forefront of my mind, is the acclamation system. So yeah, you're going to be fighting mobs like other NPCs or like other MMORPGs, but you're also going to be fighting the world. The world has climates. It has extreme situations that to go to particular places or a storm rolls through. You know, storms can be good or they could be bad, depending on how bad the storm is. But there are classes that can use the storm to do special abilities because they can, you know, summon forth the lightning from the storm itself, etc. Engaging with the world. So there's interaction with the world from needing to get glyphs or potions or armor to help you acclimate to certain parts of the world, but also the abilities themselves a lot of times actually involve the world. So are you outside? Is it nighttime? Certain abilities are available for certain situations like that, so the world is an interactable thing with the player. And these things are huge. These tenets are what they followed, making Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and they have kept to these perfectly. They have not changed since they originally laid out the game. This is like the law book that Brad McQuaid and some other dudes sat around his garage and came up with and decided we're sticking with these things because this is what makes MMORPGs good. These things, and if we can stick with these, this about guarantees we'll have a social MMO and we'll have one that's successful and that will create memories and be impactful to the community and to the genre. And I 100% agree. I think it'd be very difficult to argue with those. They're tried and true, tested in the field on other MMOs of what worked, what didn't work. Now, of course I can't cover absolutely every feature in Pantheon Rise of Fallen in every video, but now we're going to move into a lot of the features that Pantheon Rise of Fallen has, and I've talked about some of these, so I'll mention those and mention some more details, but I want to move into the ones I haven't discussed. And if you want more information, check out my channel. I have an entire playlist dedicated to Pantheon Rise of Fallen, in which you can pretty much learn more details about each one of these things as I've talked about them in several other videos in the past. Now, first of all is that Pantheon is an MMO evolved, okay? It's a different game compared to modern MMORPGs. It's immediately a social game. It has emphasis on cooperating with other players. The monsters that you're gonna face they're gonna be tougher than you're used to in like a game like World of Warcraft. Exploration's gonna be more involved. You're gonna be able to climb any surface, okay? Exploring is gonna be a huge part of it. Not only when you walk in a dungeon where you'll be able to go in any direction, but you'll also be able to climb anything. That's not just in dungeons, that goes for the outworld as well. So you're going to be really finding some really cool places and shortcuts and things that people haven't even realized yet for years after the game has come out. You're going to be finding hidden cave entrances and ways that you go through a dungeon to come out at another area. I mean, it's going to really reward you and save you a ton of time and make you kind of the hero of the group because you know that particular area really well because you've explored it a lot, and get you and your friends and you and your group out of a lot of death-defying kind of situations. Reputation mattering. That's another reason it's going to be different, because you're not just going to be queuing up for dungeon groups or whatever you want to do. You're going to be out there actually looking for groups. People are going to be looking for members, all that kind of thing non-stop, because the game's built to be that way. You'll build a reputation based on how you behave, how you treat other people, how you play the game, etc. When a game is built this way, naturally, what happens, sure, you're going to have some people who are kind of jerks or elitist or that kind of thing, but I can promise you, just based on my community alone, as we went out and played MMOs together, we are a very social, very nice, very helpful, very open to new people and people that haven't played an MMO like this. And we love seeing people experience it and learn it and get better. And teaching you. This kind of gameplay actually promotes people who are that way. So when people come into the game, maybe you're not used to a game that's difficult or whatever, you're going to be welcomed in with open arms to the community because they've been through this before. We all have. We know what it's like, and we're going to help you. We're going to help you learn your surroundings, the lay of the land, and spend some meaningful time with you in each area. We're not just going to be, going through everything as quick as possible to collect quest items or to level up as fast as possible, because that's not what Pantheon's about. Pantheon's about that journey, about the experiences, about learning on your way up to the top to max level and getting better at the game. You're going to be learning strategies. You're going to be learning and skilling up your actual character as well as leveling it up to uncover all the secrets that the world of Terminus in Pantheon has to offer. You're going to find situations with your group and with your guild where you're simply sitting there strategizing the battles ahead, things, or the boss, or what happened in that last fight we had, why didn't it work out? What could we try differently? What abilities do we have to work together? Because Pantheon is a social game. It's something that requires you to think, and it creates memories from those experiences that are going to last a lifetime. You're going to make lifetime friendships within a game that's difficult but rewarding. Next up, we have the atmosphere and climate system. So I touched on this. This is all about engaging the world. So it's a PvE based MMO, not to say they won't have PvP servers, they said they will, but it is focused on being PvE, which is player versus environment. And when they say environment, they don't just mean killing monsters like I said before. We're talking about the world itself. There's going to be places that are extremely hot, places that are extremely cold, a place that's extremely dark, and I mean just like the darkness envelops the place, where just a torch isn't enough, or places where you're silenced and you can't do spells, places where there's extreme poison that would just eat away at your hit points, tornadoes that travel through areas at particular points. And this compels players to work together to get sometimes around the situation, sometimes right through them. And like I said earlier, certain spells work better or even worse, or maybe you can't even do them at all, depending on what the climate or the atmosphere is. So earlier I talked about that. I was talking about the Call Lightning spell, which actually deals more damage than a lightning bolt spell, but can only be cast when there's a storm in the region. Let's talk about some of the spells and abilities while we're at it. So there's going to be rare items out in the world, obviously, for people that craft, for people that want better loot, for the gear itself, but also there's going to be rare abilities and spells. These are not just something you go to a trainer and everybody picks them up at a certain level. There'll be some of that, of course, as you level up, you're going to get better abilities, etc. But also there's going to be rare quests and rare ways that you can pick up exotic abilities and spells. That the example they always give is that, like a wise sage hiding in the depths of a dungeon or on top of a remote tower, right? So going out in the world and actually filling your what's called the living codex with some abilities that maybe set you a little bit apart from the other people in your class. We talked about dispositions earlier, and that's dynamic NPC encounters, not being static. changing and evolving. What Pantheon's definitely trying to do with mobs and monsters and all that kind of thing is to not have a Groundhog Day effect. So besides events that occur, and they can completely change depending on all kinds of various factors such as the population of a zone or a population of how many NPCs have spawned in that zone, and the rarer that event is, of course, the rarer the rewards will be. So, but besides the events, you've also got dynamic actual NPCs with the dispositions and the way they behave. So I talked about that a little bit before, but some of the examples for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, you know, they may flee if they feel like they're not going to make it. Maybe they stand and fight to the end. Maybe if they point C another type of NPC in the area, they'll come help them and fight. You'll get ads. Or like I said earlier, sometimes they'll target certain classes in the group. Their movement speeds could be different, but some of the examples they give are like the Alarmist, the Bully, the Craven, the Opportunist, the Protector, and the Strategist. I touched on it earlier, but situational gear. Basically what I mean by that is that it's not just always about what's the best for my class at my level, right? So it's more complicated in Pantheon because you're gonna have to think more about what am I doing right now, where am I at, what's the conditions, what's the climate, what are we gonna fight? All these things may change what gear is best for that encounter or for that situation or that area. So you can't just have best in slot. It's going to depend. Best in slot for what would be the better question in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Areas of extreme heat or cold or disease or the complete darkness, all those kind of things come into effect when you're deciding what's the best in slot for this. What are we fighting? Are we fighting the undead? Are we fighting the dragon kind? What kind of mob is it? What are we going to be doing? All this changes. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have every single piece of gear, right? It just means that there's a lot of horizontal progression that you can get, and you can get excited about a chess piece that gives you some, maybe the stats aren't as good, right? Maybe overall in the basic stat line of that piece of chess piece you got, maybe it's not as good as what you already have. However, it gives you a bonus to heat. So therefore, it's valuable. So more gear being more valuable, not just the very basic armor stat and how much strength does it give me, etc., but taking it to the next level. And that is absolutely fantastic. And also, my favorite thing about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen is the perception system. So this is something so crazy. So the sense of wonder seems to be lost in MMORPGs today. A lot of people feel it. You play a modern MMO and there's just something just not quite like it used to be, and a lot of times it's because of the internet. Let's be honest, it's because we can look up and we can find out every quest, how to do it, where to go, etc. So the perception system is an interesting way to kind of combat that. Not to say people can't still do that, but it would be super complicated and hard to navigate. So the way the perception system works is that depending on your race, depending on your class, depending on what you've done with your character, where have you been, what places have you seen, all kinds of factors come into play on whether a perception pings for you. In other words, when you're at this location, are you going to see this quest start information? Are you going to investigate further? Do you have the perception to do that? Maybe your race isn't capable of doing it. Maybe you have to get a friend who's with you to do it. Maybe you just don't even realize that that particular area even has a perception ding until you're leveling up an alt and you see it and you're like, whoa, I didn't know this quest was even here. But once again, this goes back to socializing, because if you're with somebody else, like, whoa, I just got a perception ding. And everybody's like, what is it saying? What's going on? What is this? And it suddenly changes everything for the dynamic of the group. So if you think about people trying to make guides for every single quest, and then you have these perception system thrown in there, it really throws the trail very cold very quickly. Also, before I wrap up this video, there are a few other things that I have to mention. This is a non-instanced world, and when I say non-instanced, these guys are sticking to it much better than I would if I was making the game. We're talking about non-instanced raiding, dungeons, the world, everything. And that's crazy. This day and age, right? They have solutions to the raiding problem, because I already know what you're thinking. The major guilds are going to take over, etc. It's going to be difficult to get in certain raids. Well, for one thing, there's several zones worth of raids. Not just like each zone has one raid, but each zone has lots of raids. Also, the horizontal progression of the gear also makes it difficult for people to hold down different things, because there's so many gear options that it really changes the way that groups are going to approach it and guilds are going to approach it. For everybody everybody to be geared up to do everything would be pretty ridiculous and take an absurd amount of time to get to that point. But also, we don't know how they're going to handle that yet. You know, weekly lockouts, who knows? But they claim they have a solution to do non-instanced everything, and we'll just have to hold them to it and see what they got. Now, I have watched this game go from its very super early state to what it is now, and I have to say that the graphics, the animations, the features have just continued to get enriched. Every single month, we find out more information. If you want to stay up to date on this massive, crazy MMORPG, because you're the kind of person who's tired of the modern game, you're tired of the modern MMO, you're tired of playing a single player MMO with other people near you, Pantheon Rise of the Fallen is the game for you. And I highly recommend subscribing to this channel, go into the playlist of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and binge watching it. Go get you a cup of coffee, go get you some snacks, and prepare for hours and hours of content where I discuss and break down so many things about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. And subscribe to me, because all the major news I'm going to cover here on the channel. I also do a lot of entertaining things. I do puppets, I do parodies and songs and all kinds of other things, and I also cover other MMORPGs, generally that fall in this guideline of being a social MMO, but to be honest, we don't have a lot of options. And Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, in my opinion, is the best, clearest option available and coming out. So join me here on the Nathan Napalm channel as we continue to dive deeper and deeper into Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. And guys, of course, until next time, God bless and happy gaming.
Please listen to what I say. I've been making videos all day. My friends all say I'm it's a video buffet. You can even hit replay. But please just subscribe. I can't even describe being part of my tribe. I'll even offer you a prize. But just please just subscribe and hit the bell notification too.